Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast. We're glad you're joining us for another episode, and we are very excited to have our guest today. Coincidentally, he's from right here in Utah with me. We did not know that when we scheduled the time to do the recording and to record the episode, so this is fun. This is Nick Marinoff, and he is the founder of Star Harvest Media, and again, right here in Utah. But Nick, thank you so much for taking time to join me on the podcast. And what would you like the audience to know about some of the projects you're working on?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. I've never done anything like this before, so I appreciate this opportunity. So I'll get right into it. I've been involved in the content industry for about 10 years. After serving as an independent journalist and writer for different sites and platforms, I founded a small company, which you have named, called Star Harvest Media. Began in California, where I'm originally from, spent over 30 years there, and I've taken it with me to Utah, where I'm now located, and I've written everything from sales ads and social posts to lengthy white papers for companies pretty much all over the world. I've covered tons of topics from health habits to finance to animal rights. The list really goes on and on. So if anyone's interested in a content consultation for their enterprise, please get in touch. I'd love to help you out. I've also published a book on Amazon about how to avoid debt when pursuing a college education, and I'm actually on the verge of finishing a second one that's all about the mentality of and entrepreneurship and leadership. So that'll be available on Amazon in about 2 weeks.
Oh, that's fantastic. So by the time this is released, it'll be out. So
yes, very good chance, yes.
We haven't talked about that part yet, but for the audience, it's out. So you can go check it out. That's awesome. You are obviously a writer. To say you're a writer is putting it mildly. You can write all sorts of stuff. So that's fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, let's get started with our questions here. Nick, the first question that I asked the guests this season is to talk a little bit about how a business owner knows when to pivot in their business. What are your thoughts?
Okay. So I think business leaders really should know how and when to pivot when circumstances emerge that they can't fully control. And I actually think right now, during this particular point in time, I believe this is probably a moment of grand pivoting for several companies because we are in a relatively weak economy when you really look at all the data, especially, when you compare where we were just 5 or 3 or even 2 years ago, things have fallen a bit. This is a fact. And some businesses don't really have the financial stability that they once enjoyed. Jobs are a little scarce. Things like that are arising. These issues are not necessarily always within the control of a specific individual or even a group of individuals. And they could, present problems for those who are seeking clients, for example. Potential clients may be reluctant to pay the prices that you've set, or if they don't fight you on price, they'll negotiate the heck out of you and try to get more tasks stuffed into the package that you've presented to them. They'll try to get that for little or nothing. So there are many issues that arise during times like this, and you should be able to pivot somewhat because you need to be able to keep your lights on and the water running. But here's the real clincher that I think everyone needs to remember. Pivoting is just another word for being flexible, for adapting. And adaptation is not necessarily permanent. I really think people need to remember that. It can be temporary because, as we all know, specific situations, they don't last. I mean, you look at the Great Recession, for example, as terrible as it did come to an end, and America did manage to turn itself around. So you don't necessarily need to pivot to the point that, you're basically lowering your standards to the bottom rung. You don't need to do that. And if someone really lowballs you, that's not a relationship that's worth having. I know from experience that can be troublesome. You can always go back to where you were later in the future, but you should be able to at least see what's occurring that's outside your immediate control. And if you aren't a little bit flexible, just a tad, you may wind up in a bad place with nothing but the shirt on your back. So obviously, as a business owner, as a leadership, you want to avoid situations like that. So
right. Well said. I appreciate those comments very much. Yeah, being flexible, I think that's really people can get a little bit rigid sometimes in their business instead of listening to the market and doing some of those things that you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Well said. All right. Question number 2. Nick, share with the audience one of your company's core values and how that value helps you make decisions in the company.
Gotcha. Well, one of the main things that I focus on is not just telling a story, but educating people on the subjects that I'm writing about or whatever the team members happen to be writing about. See, here's the thing. In the content industry, we're often told that we're storytellers. We're offering narratives to readers. And to an extent, I can't agree with that. But I actually think a writer's job has become broader in recent years, not just because of misinformation and things like that, but also because many people will usually get most of their material from single sources. They don't really go anywhere else. So with that in mind, I realized that probably about 85% of my readers, maybe even more, are coming to me for data that they're not necessarily getting elsewhere. So I'm not just in the delivering information business. I'm also in the getting readers to think about what's being said business. It's really the education business in a weird sort of way. And when I say that, I don't mean that everyone has to agree with what I'm reporting. I'm not trying to change a person's mind about what's going on or what they think they know. Rather, the goal is to try and introduce a different perspective and get them to think about and at least consider the other side of a situation. I think that's really important, even if it's just for a short while. And I have managed to do that, and I feel I've done a good job with that. So with all this in mind, all my decisions revolve around being as truthful as possible. And sometimes that can affect the tone or the structure of an article, how it comes off to others and whatnot. Some readers may consider the article a bit combative, or it's saying something that, they don't like, or that doesn't strike them right away in the way that it should. But at the end of the day, we've all grown up with the phrase, honesty is the best policy. And that's something that as a journalist and a writer, I live by that every day. So sometimes at the expense of another person's perspectives, it's important to me to stay truthful in everything that I produce, no matter how it may appear at first glance.
That's really interesting. I appreciate that very much. Thank you, because truthfulness is a great way to describe some people use the word integrity, and I'm with that if they want to call integrity a core value, but it's so broad that sometimes it gets lost in translation, and the owners of the company may feel like, okay, well, we have integrity. Well, what does that really mean in different situations and settings? So I really appreciate you kind of elaborating. Okay, I want to be truthful, and that may mean that perspective is a little bit different. It might get you to think a little bit differently. It might challenge how you view things, but that is your definition of truthfulness. And I appreciate you sharing that, because that is what helps the audience here to understand not only defining what that core value is, but being able to communicate it properly. And so,
absolutely,
well done. I really like how you expressed that. So,
thank you.
Question number 3: share with the audience one tip for how you identify and then recruit talent.
Okay. Well, a big thing that I look for is how fast can you move without sacrificing quality. In the content industry, we regularly face a big conundrum in that we're often taught to put quality over quantity, and yet we're also usually faced with some pretty hard deadlines. And sometimes you don't always have the biggest window of time to work on something as much as you'd like. On several occasions, I've actually had clients reach out and say, quick, I need a 500-word piece about such and such, and I need it within the hour. And you basically need to be able to work fast while still producing something that delivers the necessary data and that's still powerfully written in the time allotted. So I always ask fellow writers, how well can they do that? How fast can they produce without limiting the value and the strength of the material? Can you adhere to strict deadlines without diminishing your work? That's incredibly crucial. The second thing that I'll mention is that I look for is how well and how frequently someone can communicate with me. Communication is extremely important. Communicating well is very important, but also maintaining communication is equally significant, because as we all know, life really throws curveballs at us. Things come up that are out of our hands, and I completely understand that as a business owner and as a manager and what have you, but you should be able to maintain communication with me and tell me what's going on so that I know what you're facing. This way I can potentially get involved. Maybe I can help you out, or we can work out a plan together to ensure some winning results for all the parties involved. And, I won't know anything, and I can't help you unless you talk to me. And this all may sound cliche. I mean, I understand that this is probably something a lot of people say, but here's the thing is that in today's era where people's communication skills are really, in my opinion, kind of becoming limited through social media and texts and whatnot. There are people today that really sometimes they just answer with emojis instead of actual words. I don't quite understand that, but I don't condone it. It is what it is. But, for all those reasons that I've mentioned, communication in terms of how you do it and also how often you do it, that's really a big factor for me.
Yeah, I really like that. I chuckle because I'm the same way. I don't necessarily condemn it, but I don't condone it either. It's like, oh, you know what? Just take an extra half a second and type out what you're really... Because half the time I laugh because people send me an emoji. I'll go, I have no idea what that means. I can gather generally if they agree or disagree, but I laugh all the time. And sometimes I'll throw out a bunch of emojis that don't mean anything in my opinion. Then I'll add some text that says, I have no idea if these emojis mean anything. So if I've offended you, I'm sorry, but this is what I'm trying to say. But but I really appreciate you sharing that and I liked how you described, the importance of efficiency and accuracy, but still meeting the deadlines, because that, especially for your industry, that's a really important piece. And for other businesses, maybe that's not quite as critical, but it's important to have thought through what is really critical for us. And that's really the point of the question, why we're asking the guests all these questions, because the idea is, what is it that's really going to set you apart as you're trying to hire, and what it is that you're looking for? And you have to be able to communicate that during the interview. And I appreciate those. Again, we're very well done. All right, question number 4. Talk a little bit about how to identify and develop strengths within your company.
Okay. Well, this is kind of a tricky question because everyone, I think, to one extent or another, they already kind of know what their strengths are. I mean, Michael Jordan has to know he was strong in basketball, for example. You know what I mean? So we all have instincts about what our strengths are, and knowing this is what usually carves out the roads that we end up following in life. But I think that this can make us get a bit stuck from time to time. We get focused on this one strength that we know that we have, and it doesn't occur to us that we have other unique sets of skills or strengths that we're really not putting to good use. And in situations like this, I believe it's actually a really good practice to really listen to what those around you are saying, because for all that people that focus on the bad, there are really a lot of them that also really focus on the good. And you're going to have people around you that basically point out strengths you didn't know existed because you're too busy focusing on, what you're already familiar with. You're focusing too much on one particular department, and you can kind of build on those strengths from there. I've experienced this personally. There have been times when I'm hired to write, say, 1 to 2 articles for a client, and somehow they get a huge amount of traction on social media when only a certain amount of traffic was expected. There was obviously a strength there that I wasn't focused on or didn't see before, when others did. And then the client kind of notices what's going on, and they see an opportunity to, say, expand their following. So, they kind of commission a whole series based on this topic covered in the previous pieces to generate more traction. And it works really well because I get more business out of it while now kind of consciously being able to focus on this newly discovered strength. I've had other situations where a client reaches out and says, you did this and this very well in your last piece. Can you do it again? And, obviously they're seeing strengths I didn't necessarily comprehend at the time. So for identifying and then developing strengths within an organization, I think business leaders can really learn and build a lot by truly listening to those that they serve, whether they be clients, whether they be customers. Really listen to the people that you're serving, because they will tell you things that you're not noticing. They will tell you and kind of clue you into strengths that you didn't know you had, and you can kind of develop them from there.
Well, that's a really great insight, because you're absolutely right. We don't spend enough time listening and really acknowledging, and at least I'm this way. Maybe I'm the only one here, but sometimes when people pay me a compliment, I say, okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And then I move on, almost deflecting it. Now, I don't have to sit there and keep talking about myself with the client, but
right.
really should do, to your point, is take some time after the conversation and say, you know, what did they say? And what does that really mean? And why is that important? And to build on that. So that's a really great insight. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
All right. Well, our last question then, this is the fun one here as we kind of wrap it up. Everybody knows what this means. And for those of you that are listening instead of viewing, you have no idea what's going on, but I just put on my baseball cap because our fifth question here. It's one of my favorites to ask the guests, which is tell us some of your favorite or one of your favorite baseball stories or memories. So Nick, take it away. What's one of your favorite baseball memories?
Absolutely. That would have to be when I was 12 years old, if I remember correctly. I went on a cross-country trip with the family, and one of our stops was Washington State. We got to see the Seattle Mariners play live in person, and it was an absolute ball, part of the pun. And I actually got to see Ken Griffey Jr. in action, and he's probably one of the greatest baseball players to have ever lived. I mean, I don't think anyone can argue against that point. And the funny thing is that his team actually lost that day, so things could have gone a little better for them. But you know what? It doesn't matter. That's going to be a memory I hold on to until I'm an old man. And you know, it was raining, and it was I'll never forget that. It was just an incredible experience. So
that's awesome, Ken Griffey Jr. Yes, I agree with you. One of the greatest. So that's awesome. Well, Nick, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your insights, and thank you for being on the podcast. How can people find you?
Well, right now, the best way to get in touch with me, there are two ways. They can reach out to me on my personal blog. I can actually give the name right here. It is gotgoodreviews.game.blog/contact. I believe the link is probably going to be in the bio, in the description. And then they can also reach out to me through Muckrack, which is basically my online journalist profile. So that's muckrack.com/Nick-Marinoff. There's a little contact section on the right side of the page, so they can reach out to me through one of those two ways. And then they can also follow me on my Amazon author page, which is amazon.com/author/Nick Marinoff. They can follow that. They can get information on my first book, and they'll also be notified as soon as the new book comes out as well, which as you mentioned is going to be coming out around the same time that this gets put up. So
more than likely within days.
Exactly.
That's awesome. All right, Nick. Well, thank you again for taking time to join me. And thanks to everybody for taking time to check in, whether you're downloading it through a podcast, whether you're watching on YouTube, whatever it is. Thanks for taking time to join us on the Team Engagement Podcast, and have a great day. This is Sean Richards with the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. For more ideas, go to teamengagementpodcast.com. We also invite you to follow or subscribe to our podcast wherever you may be listening or watching. Is your business thriving? Go to tbs-score.com to find out. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.